welcome back to Brewbound's ongoing coverage of the COVID-19 pandemic's effect on the beer industry, which, as we know, has been vast. So I'm Jess Infante, Brewbound reporter. I'm home in Salem, Massachusetts. And our guest today is Mark Carpenter, who is the Chief Revenue Officer of Keg Hounds. Keg Hounds uses RFID technology to track kegs as they make their way from breweries to wholesalers to retailers and then all the way back through again. As you can imagine, and I'm sure you probably know firsthand, keg fleet is a major investment for a craft brewer, and Keg Hounds helps protect it. So ever since the pandemic forced the closure of on-premise accounts across the country to help stop the spread of the novel coronavirus, kegs have been stranded in coolers all over the place, probably wondering when they're next going to be put back to use to dispense beer, which I'm sure is what they all want to be doing. As though kegs were to have, feelings and emotions. I'm just assigning this to them. Anyway, states are starting to reopen, and they're starting to allow bars and restaurants to reopen for on-premise service, which begs the question, what's happening with all of those kegs? So, hey, Mark, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing well, Jess. How are you?
Good, thanks. So how many kegs are stranded out in the world right now?
All right. Not a ton of tracking out there universally, so we don't know for sure, but there's estimated 20 to 22 million kegs in the U.S. market. And just to make the math easier, we'll say there's 20 million.
Wow.
So we used to tell people you need about 4 kegs to handle every tap you've got, and 2 would be in the bar or in the distributor, and the other 2 would be at the brewery or somewhere in the reverse logistics process. So if you use that math, and it's very simplistic, you're talking about maybe 5 to 10 million kegs out there somewhere between restaurants and bars and distributors.
Wow. So under normal circumstances, there's about 20 million kegs floating around the country at any given time.
Right.
So what's the average keg's life cycle like? Could you trace like a year in a keg's life?
Yeah. So average keg turns about 4 times a year, and it's a really, really durable package for the most part. The keg manufacturer that I used to work for used to warranty their kegs, parts and labor, material and labor for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
So it will last for a really long time if you take care of it.
It's like a mortgage.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It is.
Crazy. So can you tell us a little bit about the history of Keg Hounds? How did you guys come to start the company, and what was the thinking behind that?
Yeah, so like I said, I used to work for one of the largest keg manufacturers in the world, and I was in charge of sales for North America. And every customer that I ever had at one point or another asked me if there was a way to track kegs.
Mm-hmm.
And they all want to be able to track kegs for different reasons. Like there are different functions in every brewery that need this information, that want this information. So the purchasing guy, that's who we were dealing with a lot of the times.
Mm-hmm.
He'd have his forecast for the next year, and he knew how many kegs he needed, but he never really knew how many kegs he was starting with. He knew how many he'd bought over history, but he didn't know how many he'd lost. And the Brewers Association assumes that loss is between 3 to 5%, which our numbers kind of bear that out as well. So, and then he also doesn't know how fast he's turning them. And he definitely doesn't know how fast he's turning them by market, and by distance and things like that. So, and if you're buying, for a big brewery, if you're buying 1,000 kegs too many, that's $100,000 you just spent that you don't need to spend. So the dollars get really big. Logistics guys want to use it because they're trying to make their logistics leaner so that they require fewer kegs. And if you don't know how fast you're turning them in general, and if you don't know specifically how fast you're turning them in each market and with each distributor, you don't know the areas to address. So for example, we have a customer, they've got, locally they're turning them really fast, but out of market, in 3 of their markets that are within a 200-mile radius, they're turning them on an average of 100 days, but they've got one distributor where they're 175 days. So they know, all right, we need to go talk to this distributor and make it faster. And then there's the maintenance guys, the production guys. They don't know when kegs are going to need maintenance. So the CO2 valves, which is the rubber gasket in the valve, the manufacturers suggest replacing those every 5 to 7 years because they're going to fail. And they don't know when they're going to fail. But if all right, this keg was we had a new valve put in this keg 7 years ago. I need the line to kick it out so that I can take a look at it and replace that valve before it becomes a leaker out in the marketplace. And then accountants want to know about it because they're trying to figure out how to depreciate these assets and what they are, and they're trying to manage all these deposits, which, if there's 20 million kegs out there and there's, between $30 and $50 of deposits attached to each one, that's, at $50, that's $1 billion that's out there just making sure these assets are secured. So that's kind of how I started getting into keg tracking, was because my customers telling me those things. I then met a guy named Jason McMurray, who was the managing director of a distributor in Nashville, and they own their own keg float for various reasons. And he saw the pain points from the distributor side, also dealing with deposits and also not knowing where they were, but they also had their own kegs, and so sorry.
That's okay.
It's a vacation.
It's family vacation week.
Yeah. But he also knew that he was losing them, and he didn't like that either. So we got together and said, all right, let's see if we can figure this thing out. And so over the course of a few years, we kind of figured out what the parameters were and what we needed to have to make it work, and what a viable system would look like from brewer to distributor to retailer. And we started looking for a technology partner too, because neither one of us are very tech savvy. And so we found a couple of guys in Colorado. One was a longtime industry veteran. He'd been in the business for about 40 years. He knew everyone on the hardware side, with tags and readers and things like that. And then the other one was a young guy, a really highly sought after programmer. He's one of those guys who went to college when he was 15 and he graduated when he was 20. So yeah, he's way smarter than me anyway.
Good for him.
Yeah, and they already had a system that was kind of in place. It needed some modifications, and so we got a couple of our beta customers and we started modifying it and getting their feedback, and it just started to evolve and until we have the system we have now.
Cool. So can you explain how RFID technology works a little bit? I have a very rudimentary understanding of it, but I'm sure you're the expert here. So just Can you detail a little bit about how this works and what it means for these kegs?
Yeah. So every RFID tag that goes on a keg, it's a unique identifier. The RFID tag has a unique serial number. And it's important to know that keg manufacturers about 8 or 10 years ago started laser etching barcodes on the top domes of their kegs, because all the customers wanted to track them. No one could really figure out how to do it, but this was kind of a basic way to do it. The trouble with barcodes is, first of all, that they degrade over time. So they get dirty and they'll get scuffed and they're hard to read. And the second thing about them is you need to have line of sight to read them, which means you need to be 6 to 8 inches away from it, and the light needs to be right. And there's a lot of things that really have to go right to read a barcode consistently. And all the brewers, they want to track kegs, but they don't want to spend a lot of time doing it. And so by using RFID frequencies, RFID tags, that allows you to be about within 4 to 8 feet of the tag and still be able to read it. And you don't have to have line of sight. It doesn't matter about the lighting. It allows you to really scan in bulk without adding any time to your day. Like for our customers that are using RFID, the average brewer is going to spend maybe 15 minutes a day tracking his kegs, and that's it. It's going to be really, really fast, and it's really, really seamless, and it's easy to integrate with all your existing systems.
That's a huge time save.
It is.
So, what does keg tracking really do for breweries, other than the obvious, if it tells you where all your kegs are? How else can this help your business?
Right. Well, right now, knowing where all your kegs are is a pretty big deal. All the restaurants and bars are closed. Guys are trying to figure out what kegs are out there in the field, which ones, what's in them, how old are they, when were they filled. But other than that, brewing, if you're a brewery owner, a brewery manager, this is going to give you data that's going to help you make good strategic decisions based on what is probably a brewery's top 3 biggest expenses in the keg float. So you're going to know, again, you're going to know how many you have. You're going to know how fast you're turning them. You're going to know how many are in the market, how long they've been there. You're going to know who's losing them. You can track your fill sessions. So you can use that. It's almost like a management tool. You can track fill sessions and shipments and things like that, that are more, I don't want to say clerical, but they're more administrative tools that help you manage your brewery better. And you can communicate. So if you have a shipment coming up, the manager can enter what's supposed to go in that shipment. And the guy on the floor with our system will automatically know what he's supposed to pick and what he's supposed to have on that shipment, as far as not just kegs, but we can manage your bottles and cans and stuff like that as well.
That makes so much sense. And I feel like this is like a really sound business decision. What this kind of reminds me of is my husband studied abroad in Ireland in college, and he told me about how like all of the farmers and have like their flocks of sheep, they spray paint the sheep so they know which sheep belongs to which farmer. So this is a much more high-tech version of that.
It
plus
is. It is. Yeah, exactly. And you know, kegs are now already, you know, they usually get embossed on the chime, which is the top skirt where you kind of have your name stamped in it. You'll
Mhm.
get silk screened, and that helps distributors and stuff, people identify them out in the marketplace. But to really get that granular data that helps them out, every keg's got to have its own unique identifier.
Yeah, I mean, just knowing like how long an account holds a keg for, that helps you know, like, okay, let's cut down on their allotment, or these guys are selling a lot of our beer. What else can we do to help them? Or these guys aren't selling much of our beer. How can we help them? So
Exactly. You can
very
really, yeah, you can really optimize how you're using your keg float
great. I'm sure it gives you a very holistic picture of your draft business.
for sure.
But what happens to kegs that aren't marked or tracked? Where do they go?
Well, again, the Brewers Association says that, or believes that annual loss is about 3 to 5%. And again, our numbers bear that out. But in most cases, if your kegs have your name on them, you'll most likely get them back beyond that 3 to 5%. If you send out a keg that's not embossed or doesn't have some kind of identifier on it, you're just never going to see it again.
Wow,
It's going to get lost, or the distributors are going to be out there in the field, and they're not going to know. They're not going to know which one's supposed to pick it up.
Mhm. Which is like that's a huge loss if you multiply that out
Exactly.
over
Yeah.
what it's about $100 a keg.
Yep. That's the average. I mean, keg prices are based on the exchange rate and the prices of steel at a given time. So, like, I've sold a half barrel for as much as $150, and I've sold them for as low as 85.
Wow,
So
so
it really does fluctuate. Yeah, but we use that $100 average just because it's easier.
that makes sense. So, what do people need to be thinking about right now for the draft portion of their business going forward? Because we're at kind of a weird crossroads right now. So, what should you be
Yeah.
thinking?
Well, it's a weird time, but it's a good opportunity too. So right now, restaurants and bars have been closed, but most places are starting to open up a little bit on a limited basis.
Mhm.
So a lot of the customers that we're talking to are starting to move kegs around, but it's still going to be slow. It's still going to be kind of a phased opening. Again, restaurants and bars are going to go from 25 to 50% open to 75 to 100% open. But you've still got arenas and stadiums and things like that, which take huge amounts of draft beer. And it's going to be a long time before those things open. So now is really, really a good opportunity to get a handle on how many kegs you have. So, because they're going to be moving slow. And in normal times, you're selling beer as fast as you can because you're making money as fast as you can. But right now, that's just not going to happen. And there's also a lot of beer, maybe not a lot of beer, but there's going to be some beer that's going to go old out in the marketplace, and you're going to have to get rid of it. And all these are just different touch points with your kegs as they slow down. And so it's a great opportunity for people to get a handle on what their keg float is. Again, they probably know how many they've bought or how many they're leasing or whatever, but they really don't. No one really knows how many they have unless you're tracking them. And you can say, all right, I haven't seen this keg in 6 months, or I haven't seen this keg in a year, so I know I can probably write that one off. Right now is a good time to start getting that information. Yeah, you want to get. You want to put some kind of identifier on your keg. Again, whether it's a barcode, an RFID tag, now is the time to start. It's really a once in a lifetime opportunity to do that. And you want to get your keg size on there. The keg size, if you can get, the date of manufacture or the last time it was serviced or any kind of information like that you can get into a database. Now is a really good time to do that because some of your labor force probably isn't going to be fully optimized either. There's going to be a little bit of downtime again, just because things are moving slow. So again, it's a really unique time in history. Hopefully it never happens again, but it's a great opportunity to get a handle on what's going on with your keg float.
Okay, can you foresee any issues for where I know everybody is? If you've been able to pivot to packaging, that's what you've done. So are there like stockpiles of empty kegs hanging out somewhere? Is that an issue?
I don't know if it's an issue right now. I think the distributors, they're so focused on bottles and cans and stuff like that. I think the kegs are kind of okay where they are. They're okay, kind of staying in place for now. But I think as the kegs start to come back from distributors and they do that, the brewers are probably going to have the biggest stockpile of all the kegs. Like, they're going to have all their own kegs there in one spot, as opposed to having them out in the market and out in restaurants and bars and out in distributors.
Great. Now, this is probably a silly question that I should have asked you earlier. I mean, can wholesalers also make this investment to protect the kegs that they have, or do kegs are just owned by breweries?
Kegs are mostly owned by breweries. There are a really small number of kegs out there owned by distributors. So this is not the asset typically is owned by the brewers, so it's kind of on them to track them.
Gotcha. And what else can they do to protect their investment other than tracking?
That's really the main thing. So there's tracking and there's annual maintenance again, or not annual, but periodic maintenance. So keg valve manufacturers recommend replacing CO2 valves every 5 to 7 years to prevent leakers. So that's what they need to be doing. And now's a great time to do that as well.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. If you're not filling these and sending them back out, you might as well take care of them.
Right. And I would also recommend once you do get your kegs back, empty them and clean them, because you don't want a keg just to sit there dirty, because it's not going to get better. It's only going to get worse. It's kind of like not cleaning your lines. Like if a brewery hasn't like kind of winterized their draft lines by now, they're probably pretty nasty, and it's going to cost you a lot more to get them up and running again when things do start up.
Oh God, what a good point. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, Mark, I'm so glad you took the time to chat with us today. This is really fascinating. And I want to let you get back to your vacation. So
I appreciate your time, Jess.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we'll talk to you soon.